Hi boys and girls. Today we're going to be talking about some important items from a story we're going to be reading called A Giraffe and a Half. So we're going to take a look in our special Jackdaw basket. So our first item that we have here is a giraffe. Now, what's a little bit goofy about this giraffe? He's got a suit on, doesn't he? In this story, the giraffe featured will also have a suit on. Is that something that you see every day? Probably not. Now, this is a ruler. And if we recall what we've learned about measurement, things can go up 1 inch, half an inch, multiple measurements. So what we're talking about today is if we take our giraffe and stretch and stretch and stretch, we could have a giraffe and another half. That's where the term giraffe and a half comes from. Now here's a goofy one. What is this? It's a rose, isn't it? So in the story, we talk about sticking a rose in the giraffe's nose. That doesn't seem like something you'd normally do, does it? But we'll find out later what the giraffe does with the rose. And this is a bike. This is a special kind of bike, actually. It's probably not one that you've normally seen, but in the story, the giraffe gets a spike in his bike. What would happen, do you think, if you got a spike in your bike? This is a flute. We talk about the giraffe playing a flute. Does that seem like something you would see a giraffe doing? Probably not. We also will have a chair. The chair is something that the giraffe uses to comb his hair. Is that something that you think that the giraffe will do, or that makes sense?